Earlier this morning, there was a poll that was put out, and the question was, what do we think are some of the key drivers behind the threats that we're seeing emerging in the payments landscape? And the majority of the room, and Governor, I'm not sure if you were in the room at the time, so I'll tell you that the majority of the room said the criminals are getting increasingly smarter and getting increasingly sophisticated. So, if that is true, this panel discussion wants to answer the question, how then do we manage for financial crimes in payments? And how do we do that while we're striking a balance between access and safety? And do they necessarily need to be trade-offs of each other? Or can we achieve an outcome of both and? I'm going to invite the gentlemen who are in the wings on standby. Gentlemen, please come and join me on stage. I'll introduce them shortly. But let's give them some energy with a warm round of applause as they come in. Don't look so serious. It's going to be a really good conversation. So please come in and take your seats. With me here on stage, closest to me, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. Pieter Smit. He's the Acting Director of the Financial Intelligence Center. Next to Pieter is Dr. Josephat Mutepfa. He is in the Financial Markets Division in the National Payments and Fintech Department in the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. So a big welcome to you, sir. And last but not least, I think we met Charles yesterday. When he was contributing, asking a question, he introduced himself and said, "They call me Charles." So this is Mr. Charles Nevhutanda, the acting head of Financial Surveillance Department at the South African Reserve Bank. So, gentlemen, welcome. Again, as we sit down and get ready to engage, the invitation is explicit to everybody in the room that I don't want to keep them to myself. I certainly want to have an opportunity to put some questions and comments from you to the gentlemen on stage. But maybe, Pieter, you're closest to me, so maybe let me start off with you. When you reflect on your experience, how can regulatory frameworks in particular, because regulation has been a big part of the conversation up until now, how do we design them so that they meet the dual mandate of one, combating financial crime, but also not limiting access to financial services, especially in the context of the most underserved communities?
Mm-hmm. So I think the two things to keep in mind is regulatory frameworks should firstly entrench a risk-based approach. I think it's paramount for regulatory systems to be built on the fact that institutions need to manage risk. There are many different risks that institutions need to manage, and in the payment space, most of those materialize upstream or downstream before the actual payments happen. And that's, I think, also where a lot of the focus on managing risk needs to be placed in the way that regulatory systems phrase obligations for institutions. And to be able to focus on those areas before payments actually are initiated, when customers are onboarded or when cash is dispensed from a system, etc. The other aspect is, I think, for regulatory systems to be framed as outcomes that need to be achieved.
Right.
In other words, explaining what it is that institutions need to do when we expect them to manage risks, rather than how they should do that. It's when regulatory system starts getting into the how-to that we run into serious problems, that we create anomalies that institutions cannot meet. And that's especially where we then get in the way of access to financial services, where we actually make it impossible for institutions to do business with people that have absolutely no crime risk and that are underserved in other senses in our financial system.
So, Pieter, you highlight two key design features. You talk about a risk-based approach that enables us to go to work and look for risk upstream and downstream. You talk about an outcomes-based approach so that we're really able to have the nuance of distinguishing between those who could be a risk and those who don't. So let me build on that, Josephat, and bring that particular design imperative or features that Pieter has spoken about and say, how does that stack up compared to what you were seeing in the Zimbabwean Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. When you think about specific regulatory measures that you've put in place, how have you ensured that on the one hand, they are addressing the security concerns, but on the other hand, they're still enabling access to financial services?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. You know, it's amazing. I was wondering, on a lighter note, what is behind the stage? and when we were taken there, I noticed that's the plumbing behind the conference. And I was told payments is the plumbing behind the success of the financial services sector. So balancing the two is not easy, but it can be done. I must say that payment systems has always been about managing risk. When you are developing payment systems, you need to ensure that they have a comprehensive risk management framework. And later on in the years, it was always operational risk as the major one, and the major risks we all know, liquidity, credit, and everything. But later on, we began to see cybersecurity coming as a risk as well. And then we had to build up on our regulation to add a cybersecurity layer. And naturally now, we have seen AML-CFT coming to the boardroom again, and very strongly. And we have also been given in Zimbabwe a mandate to be a competent AML-CFT supervisor. So if I can just go back, why were we given this mandate? We had gone into the grey list twice. And we had come out. And in the last coming out of from the grey list, we, as payment systems, contributed quite well as we showed the assessors that most of our payments are digital, and it became a coping mechanism to manage AML-CFT. So after that, our AML-CFT law in the country allows designation of certain institutions with expertise to manage particular risks. So in the Reserve Bank, I'm one of the regulators of AML-CFT. But balancing the two, the trade-off, is always difficult. But what I must say is that safety has always been one of our objectives in the payment space. But it's only that it's expanded mandate. So we have two mandates in the bank in terms of supervision and oversight. We are the overseer of the payment system. That's one from the regulation. Now we have the AML-CFT supervision. So we had then to tune ourselves to that organizational structure. That's what we had to do. Not easy. Any of us here would know mandate comes first and the resources comes last. You are lucky if you get the resources before you leave. Maybe let me leave it at that.
I feel that we might have to unpack a few of those, but thank you, Josephat, for raising that. But I think it's important that what you've shared mirrors a lot of what we heard in the first panel. You talk about an expanded arena of risk. Cybersecurity is certainly one of the issues that has already come to the surface as one of the key threats that we need to be looking at. But you're also leaving us with a provocation, which is the extent to which mandates are resourced in order to be able to do the both and, in order to secure the safety and security while enabling access. And I think that's probably something we might hear from the floor being picked up on a little bit more. Of course, grey listing, not new to South Africa with our own experience in 2023, but it's important that, you know, you've also shared your journey with us in how being grey listed twice, the journey coming out of that. But Charles, let me come to you and say, having heard Pieter, having heard Josephat and the experience from Zimbabwe, what are the specific surveillance practices that one would find in the South African Reserve Bank, in particular, that are designed to detect and prevent the illicit financial outflows, as an example? And I'm going to add another layer to this, Charles, that still are able to ensure user privacy, because we've been talking about safety and security broadly. Let's bring the privacy part of the question, conversation in now.
No, thank you very much. So let me just start by saying that we have made huge progress with regard to the exchange control legislation in South Africa.
Yeah.
In order to promote cross-border payments, investments, and trade. So the idea is to say, when economic participants, individual corporates, and institutional investors, when they interact cross-border, they must not feel the impact of exchange controls or restrictions. So it must be, the idea is that it must just be seamless, so that's the main aim. So the minister then gave us precondition to say, you can liberalize, but I want the following. I need to ensure that you don't lose the information.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information that you get from applications. That information cannot be lost. Two, you must make sure that you strengthen the fight against illicit flows.
Yes.
So that is very cardinal. So whatever we do, we must ensure that the fight against illicit flow is strengthened. And the third one that is very, very important, ensure that we do away with the red tapes. This understanding that there are red tapes within the systems, and those red tapes must be done. So how do we put it in practice ourselves as a department? We started at the beginning. We said, when we appoint people, when we appoint entities, what type of entities are we bringing to the system?
Right.
Are they fit and proper? What type of people that are in charge of the system? So we are very vigorous in terms of our vetting process. And you find that in the past we've even closed some of the entities that were not doing what we think they were supposed to do. We even withdraw some license on some of them. So that is very, very important for us. The other issues, I think the Deputy Governor mentioned the issue of technology. We embrace that.
Sure.
We started cross-border reporting online in terms of the system before it became fashionable. Everybody now talk of cross-border reporting system. We started that long time ago. We went internationally. There was nobody who had a cross-border system that report everything real time to the Reserve Bank. So we were the pathfinder in that respect. So we developed the cross-border reporting system. All transactions are reported to us, and we are able to analyze and detect. And and we have rolled this, and together with the CMA, this reporting system has been rolled out to the whole region of the CMA, which means that you cannot run away. When you go to Eswatini, you go to Namibia, it's still going to be reported. So that is very, very important. But we are even want to go a step further to say we want to jack it up so that it's proactive. Currently, it's reactive. So I can flag you with one of the bank, then you can go and do transfer to another bank.
Yeah.
So we want to develop a system that if we flag you, wherever you go, they will say refer to SAP. So that's where we are going. So it's very, very important. And we're also developing a system that currently must be able to talk with our revenue service, with SARS. That for us is very, very important because we want to ensure that in the long run, individuals, corporates can do everything as long as their tax are proper. They should be able to take money out of the country as long as the tax are proper. So we should be able to engage with SARS ourselves technologically. So currently we are there, but we're not there.
So I'm hearing a lot of things, and I'm maybe just going to lift up a few. One is what I'm hearing is a consciousness of an awareness of a gap. You're saying we realize that we might still be reactive. We want to become more proactive, and then so I'm keen to understand what are some of the jumps and the steps that would need to be taken in order to get there. But what I'm also hearing, Charles, and I just want to validate this with you, is that there must be then a strong feedback loop that goes back to the SARB, that allows you to think critically about the policies, the mechanisms that you're putting in place. What does that look like?
So maybe the other issue that you raised was the issue for confidentiality. Let me just address that. I think in terms of the Bank Act, Section 33 of the Bank Act, it forced us to ensure that third-party information cannot be closed to other parties. So this very, very, so we really abide by that. Sometimes we're taken to court by people who want some information, and we said, no, we can't. So that's really, it's, even though the information is coming technologically, it's very restricted. And it's only used for specific purpose. If we're going to share within the bank, it's going to be shared at aggregate level.
Sure.
not as of. So it's very, very important. The issue of us getting the feedback, we have a very good relationship with the market. We sit with the banking sector quarterly. Quarterly, we sit with our authorized dealers, our adlers, where we get feedback or how we are doing in the market. We also have a good relationship with the bodies that are involved in various sectors, ASISAs, the authorized dealers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we get that. But above that, we also does benchmarking work on how our system is operating. So we have been liberalizing exchange control for some time. A decision was taken that we need to benchmark the progress that we've made with regard to liberalization of exchange control and illicit fighting. So we brought the OECD to come and do a benchmark on us.
Sure.
And a report has been given to us that really tells us a story about where we are.
So there's some mirror holding that happens on the back of those benchmarks, and that gives you almost a tangible evidence of where some of those gaps may be. But I'm also hearing you talk about the overall health of the ecosystem and the posture of the Reserve Bank within that ecosystem really then allows you to have these ongoing touch points to be able to do that work. The other thing that you raised, and I want to bring it to you, Pieter, is that Charles mentions technology, and he says, you know, technology has been important in enabling us to analyze where the risks are, identify where they are, mitigate them to a certain extent, be responsive where we can. One of the things that Radhika spoke about yesterday was AI. And yes, we didn't speak too much about AI yesterday, but when you think about emerging technologies, I'd like you to think, you know, to put sort of Fintech hat on. I'd like you to think about AI as an example. To what extent are these being efficiently leveraged in the prevention and detection of financial crime, in your view?
I don't think nearly enough. I think it's impossible to do what regulators, law enforcement agencies, etc., are required to do these days and not make full use of technology. And I think the thing that we don't realize, or I don't think we've internalized as regulators, is that technology is agnostic as to who's using it.
Sure.
Technology doesn't know good from bad. Just like a motor vehicle doesn't know whether the driver is drunk or is a good driver. The car will just drive wherever you point it towards. And I don't think we have embraced the fact that, we always bemoan the fact that criminals use technology, they're so clever, so far advanced, but we don't embrace the fact that we need to be doing the same thing. Digital identity was mentioned in the
Sure.
previous panel discussion just now. It's an excellent opportunity to bring transparency to the payments world, to the financial system. But we're not embracing the ability to use it and leverage it to our advantage. AI, similarly. It's impossible for us as regulators or even as law enforcement agencies to see all the information, all the connecting points and patterns within all the data that's out there unless we make use of something like artificial intelligence and the tools that enable us to see things that are there but not visible to the human eye. And I think we have a long, long way as regulators and the state machinery that's meant to enforce or guarantee the safer aspects of the payment system to actually embrace that.
So let me press on you a little bit, Pieter, and double click on this and put you in a little bit of a corner. I don't know where Zinhle is today, but I'm channeling my inner Zinhle in this moment. One of the things that Zinhle raised, and it also touches on something that Charles has spoken about. Zinhle said, well, is it possible that we should be exploring a closer relationship with, for example, the Department of Home Affairs, who are the custodians of identity in our society? Charles talks about constant ongoing engagements with SARS as a way of, working across institutions. And the question to you that I'm asking is, what in your view is a whole of government approach? What could it unlock in terms of really allowing us to get to safe, secure digital identities? And who needs to do what to make that a possibility?
Yeah. Firstly, I think the collaboration between different parts of government that have different information sets or custody of different information systems is in place is happening. It's starting to develop within the South African environment.
Yeah.
We see a lot more engagement, for instance, between authorities and in the financial sector space and the Home Affairs Department on we have systems in place where institutions can now directly tap into the Home Affairs databases to confirm a customer's identity against the Home Affairs information, etc. Revenue service information is still a little more difficult to get access to, but South Africa is actually much further advanced in that respect than many other countries where it's just a complete taboo to talk about anybody knowing anybody about anybody's tax affairs. In South African terms, the revenue services really come to the party where they see themselves as part of the information machinery and making the information available, albeit in controlled circumstances. What's lacking is the technology to bring all of that together and to weave that into a homogeneous system where the information that sits in one area can be leveraged by another area. I was part of a discussion not too long ago, the past few weeks, about a SADC-wide digital ID initiative that's still currently happening. But one of the key aspects there is to connect these sources of citizen information, Home Affairs departments across different SADC countries to enable that and to convert the information into a digital identity that can then be shared across jurisdictions. That's a fantastic initiative.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that the thinking is already there, is starting to happen around that is a very positive sign.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting in light of one of the sound bites that we've been hearing since yesterday that says technology is not the problem. And so what I'm hearing you say that in the SADC region, there is a technology that could make this a possibility. And I won't press this on you, Pieter, but I just ask it generally to the room. What then could be the problem? If the technology is there, what are the other things that are probably bottlenecks that would, if we were able to address them, we could accelerate that journey of getting to a regional digital identity. And I'll leave it as a hanging question in the room. I want to go back to you, Josephat, and I see table 8 and table 31 want to get into the conversation, and we'll get to them soon. Another thread that was carried over from yesterday, Josephat, has been about the consumer at the center. And in this particular instance, I want to talk about the education of the consumer in particular, and from a Zimbabwean experience, how we're ensuring that customers are educated and aware of the various threats that they might come up against, and what strategies seem to be working that we could potentially learn from as South Africa.
Thank you very much. Everyone needs capacity. So the first thing is, with this new mandate, we needed to first capacitate the regulator, the central bank.
Sure.
Because it's something we were not doing all these years, and suddenly it's now a mandate. So after that capacitation, which we collaborated very closely with the Financial Intelligence Unit, because they've been doing it, we then moved further now to capacitate the overseen or the supervised.
Sure.
For them to know what is the difference between the oversight and the MLCFT supervision.
Yes. Yeah.
Once we have done that, which we have done successfully and is ongoing, we now work with these operators to be able to disseminate the knowledge to the consumers. So whenever they apply for any new service or any new institution comes into the fray, they need to demonstrate MLCFT risk-based approach to say what are they doing and what have they put in place in terms of systems to monitor and manage these risks. And then we also ask them for a consumer protection and consumer awareness strategy. On a yearly basis, they bring up a consumer awareness strategy, which shows both MLCFT and also product knowledge itself, and also even issues of cybersecurity, because together they need to be done. Then what we've also done is to partner with other organizations outside the bank. One of the key organizations has been the Consumer Protection Authority. We have a Consumer Protection Authority which has a separate mandate, and it's overspread over all goods and services.
Yeah.
So we partner with them for actually public awareness, where we go, our first point of call has been to go into the outside the cities. We took a survey and we noticed that the cities to some extent understand
Yeah.
through social media and all those, people sort of understand the do's and don'ts. But when it comes to the rural areas, which Zimbabwe 70% of the population lives, that knowledge is not there. So we had to start with the rural areas. We also had to partner with the Ministry of Education. And why Ministry of Education is teach them young.
Yeah.
So we wanted the students to be able to understand this area. I'm glad to say I sit on boards of 2 universities in Zimbabwe, and those universities have gone further to even bring curriculum which
Sure.
caters for those areas of AML, CFT, and cybersecurity, which was not there before. When I went to university, it's just a straight degree. You could do anything from managing a business to running a business to even becoming a politician. You could do anything from
Yeah.
that degree, but now you can actually specify on certain areas. So those are some of the things we have actually done.
So, Josephat, it's a very impressive and comprehensive list. So, from one, the capacity to actually meet the mandate around money laundering and mitigating that, right? Got that. Consumer awareness, product knowledge, working with cities, not forgetting the rural areas, and it goes on and on. Let me be a little bit cheeky and ask this question. How do you know that all of that is working?
I think, thank you very much for that question. It's a very good question. You know, it's like an exam. I've lectured at university.
Yeah.
And you'll be shocked when you are marking the papers that only half of the class understood you and half did not. It's unfortunate. But I think what we do also, what we have seen working, is to come to smaller groups.
Sure.
Where focus groups. And then using the mother languages in those areas, not easy to teach payment systems and AML using your vernacular language. It's not easy. It's a skill we are trying to develop. So it's something we have, with the team, sit down and say, when you are going to an area where Ndebele is spoken,
Sure.
you need a Ndebele fluent person who understands how we can juxtapose Ndebele and English and use visuals and all that, and Shona speaking as well. We are glad we only have 2 major languages, so it's easier. I shudder to say, for a country with more than 10, 15 languages, how do you do it?
Yeah.
It's very difficult, but that's one of the things we've done. And also customer feedback.
Sure.
We have allowed as a central bank that if someone feels that they have been shortchanged by any institution, they can complain to the institution, there's a complaint mechanism, but they can also complain to the regulator, and we'll be able to see where the challenges are. And unfortunately, from a rural area perspective, I think recently we had some challenges with mobile money where we had to freeze some accounts. And sad to say, I found myself freezing accounts of rural chiefs because they were caught in the bucket of whatever we had put in place.
Yeah.
So explaining to the rural chiefs that your account has been frozen because of AML CFT was not easy.
Yeah.
It becomes very political.
Yeah.
But I think we have got the agility to manage that and also separate issues. And from there, 2 or 3 of the chiefs invited us to share with their communities what exactly this means so that people are not taken advantage of. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josephat. I think that's been really interesting to listen to you, not only talking about the feedback mechanism, but also that when we talk about putting the customer at the center and meeting the customer or the consumer where they're at, it actually means going to where the consumer is at and actually meeting them physically where they're at to really understand how are they consuming the information. And I'll never forget the example of your lecturing. I'll always remember that after this conversation. How do you know people really have understood what you've just lectured? So, I've got 2 questions, 2 tables on standby. Charles, final question to you before I go to the floor. What about enforcement agencies? We haven't really spoken about that, and I want to bring that into the conversation. Does the Reserve Bank collaborate with enforcement agencies when those risks have been detected? What does that look like, and what works in that particular arrangement?
I think the issue of the grey listing is also a blessing in disguise, because it has helped us to galvanize the collaboration between us
Yes.
as different regulators, and also with the enforcement agencies. I think it has strengthened that aspect. So from SAB point of view, we can only enforce and confiscate money, block accounts, and take money to deposit to treasury. But we don't have the power to take the criminal route. So that's where we work hand in hand with our enforcement agencies, work hand in hand with FIC, work hand in hand with also the FSA, so that we are able to collaborate. The PA, we are able to collaborate together, so that we are able to deal with the illicit flows. There is a task team already that has been established, that is chaired by the divisional head in our division, Compliance and Investment Division, that chaired a task team that work hand in hand with the enforcement to say, how do we facilitate, streamlines or prosecution, because there's a concern that prosecution is slow.
Sure.
So we as regulators, we are doing all the best. We even refer staff with forensic, but it's slow. So I think we are now in a situation where we've got a very close working relationship, and we are seeing progress.
Sure.
We are seeing progress since the working together as part of moving out of grey listing. So we're hoping that these initiatives will remain, even after the grey listing story is passed.
Yeah, Charles, I think it's an important departure point for us to go to the floor now, because again, when it comes to prosecution, what you do is as important as what you're seen to be doing. And I think it's been the thread this morning about how do you build confidence, how do you build trust, and I think it's a combination of those things. So let me go. I've got 4 tables on standby. I'd love to actually take all 4 questions. Table 8, table 76, table 31, and then table 47 in that order, please. So table 8, is that Zinhle's table? Yes, it is. All right. Zinhle, let's kick us off for this morning. What's your question? Let's try again. It has to be on. Whether it's green or red, it definitely has to be on. Okay, try speaking and then the team will...
Good morning.
Yes.
Great.
Go for it.
Thank you so much, Mashabalala, and greetings to the House at large. Again, my name is Zinhle Mgomezulu from the FSCA. Quite an interesting conversation this morning by the gentleman, and I just want to go back to, this fight against fraud, AML, which is not only a national issue, but an international issue as well. And, going also to the highlights that we've had, saying that, if technology is not the problem, then what is the problem?
Sure.
My question is leaning more on the centralization of data. And the question is to the gentleman, is data centralization a path that should be investigated or explored more than it already has in the fight against fraud and AML? And could this possibly encourage proactive behavior then, rather than reactive behavior? And as a regulator, how can this be obtained?
Thank you very much. So we'll put that question. I'd love to have both Pieter and Charles speak to it, because Pieter, you spoke about the data, but Charles, you spoke about the journey from being increasingly proactive. So we'll put that. Zinhle, thank you very much. Let me go to, in the order that we'd asked, I think it's table 76. Have I got that right? 76, you're up next.
Okay.
There we go.
I'm Rachel from Capitec Bank. So what has been on my mind since yesterday is the question around the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, PAPS, right? So yesterday we started the conference, looking at payments developments, especially with emerging countries that have done wonderful things. And I think it was Radhika who actually touched on, the ability and the capability to do cross-border payments and even inter-regional payments. And I think the question started from there to say, as South Africa, why does it look like right now we are not aggressively looking into joining the PEPS network? And I think I wanted to ask Dr. Josephat, because I know that from a Zimbabwean perspective, the PEPS agenda has been adopted, right? We spoke about digital ID, and for me, going into PEPS also broadens the connectedness and the amount of data insights we can go and access from that. We spoke about greater oversight over cross-border payments, and I think there was Charles made a nice example that says we're at a position that even if you go to Botswana, we will find you, and we need to get to a point where even if you go to West or East Africa, we should find you. So the question is around PEPS. It looks like PEPS has got some potential to answer to some of the imperatives that we've been discussing in this conference. So for Zimbabwe, what has it meant? And maybe even to Charles, from a financial surveillance perspective, what are the factors that are holding back going into it?
Thank you very much, Rachel. It's an excellent question. So benefits of being part of PEPS from a Zimbabwean perspective. And then Charles, why are you not in the club yet? Is the question from Rachel put simply. So let's go to table 31, please.
Hi, my name is Firdaus Norship from Standard Chartered Bank. So my question, before I pose the question, just from yesterday and some of the sound bites that we've been hearing, there seems to be a push in terms of this modernization project that we've seen for quite a number of years. And we've heard things like laws and regulations must revamp and evolve to support the modernization project, as well as regulators need to be more agile in their thinking and move quicker. And in addition, there seems to be a differing of opinion sometimes between regulators in terms of taking this particular ideology of modernization forward. So my particular question, and if I may be so cheeky as in to ask the FIC, how does the FIC align to the modernization conversation in drafting regulation that not only meets the risks that we need to mitigate under your mandate, but are seen to be more agile to support this conversation of modernization, innovation, and digitization? And this is without making the cost of compliance untenable.
Sure. All right, Peter, that's definitely for you. So in light of the conversation around the support for modernization, how are you aligned to that? And how are you thinking about the cost of compliance in the context of that? I've got two. I had one more, but I will sneak in the last one, and then I'll turn to the panel, and then we will work our way through. So to table 47, please. You may please go ahead.
Thank you. Again, my name is Stephen Maura Duarte. I've been a regulator of payment and banking systems. I want to ask that technology has been used to enhance financial services, both by the banks and by the fintechs. The need to have subtechs, because when you think very hard, you cannot catch crime, you cannot deal with AML issues based on the traditional ways of manual checking. So we are asking what is the progress, especially within South Africa, with regard to development of subtech tools. And when I'm talking about this, I want to ask South Africa to do what they have done for us in Africa for the longest. They've been able to develop technological tools that make Africa also shine. And in this regard, I remember when it was in the RTGS days, Samos and the Perago were products that we are proud of. we are looking and asking the panel, and in any case, anybody in the room, what is South Africa doing for us in the continent to be leaders in development of SupTech tools? Because I believe for us to be able to do this digital everything, the need for SupTech and AI products is necessary. So we want to hear what is happening on the frontiers of development of SupTech tools, and a challenge to our leader, South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mora. So again, SupTech tools and the role of South Africa in creating and building that capacity for the region and the continent. Where are we? Who's working on it? Who's leading? And then the final question is going to come from table 56, please.
Good morning, colleagues. I think my name is Mukitimi Mraudzi from the South African Reserve Bank, and mine is a short question, and that is, how do you balance the risk how do you balance the need to have this regulation that combats crime in the same time without compromising the need for fast payments? Because I think there's a natural friction that exists there, and the CMA situation that's happening right now is perhaps a good example that I think for me would be interesting to know in terms of how do we balance that risk, because sometimes it can create some turmoil. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I missed your name, please, sir.
Oh, Mukitimi Muraudzi, South African Reserve Bank.
All right, thank you very much. So it's quite a healthy batch of questions, and we're going to try and work our way through them. But maybe it's a good place to start in that final question. And Charles, maybe I want to bring that question to you, because I think it gets to the core of what we've been talking about, but mainly because it brings the conversations from yesterday front and center into the room. The suggestion is that there's a natural tension between the push for fast payment systems and combating crime at the same time. How do you respond to that? But more importantly, is it a natural tension that can be overcome, and that there are tools that can help us navigate that?
No, thanks very much. So we are looking at this thing from this position that says that we must move to a risk-based approach. So where you say that, are these type of transactions risky? Do they have financial stability issues? So if those type of transactions, you put like a low value transactions, they may be in numbers, they may be more in terms of volumes, but in terms of value, they may not have a risk to the system. So that's how we try to balance the issue of what you are saying, where we are saying that you want payment to move at a high pace, but then we need to say, is this type of transaction really going to bring risk? But our view is that the type of transaction that we're allowing them now to move at a fast pace is a low value transactions which won't have a negative impact on the system. That's how we approach it.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that, Pieter, to what Charles has said?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that in the global discussion, faster, cheaper, and safer payments are placed on an equal footing. So that means naturally the one will limit the other at some point. And as long as the balance is maintained between the three, that's the objective that one needs to strive for, not to achieve the one at the cost of the other.
Sure.
So safer payments is not often discussed. You always hear, there's a lot of discussion about faster payments and cheaper payments, but not a lot of discussion about safer payments. In my own view, and I would like to know if I have a misconception of this, but the safer payment is a payment that's transparent and traceable. In other words, you know who made the payment and you know where to find them. Or somebody knows, and somebody knows where to find them.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that they're known to everybody in the ecosystem. And I think that's where technology comes to the fore. Because the need to know who the person is or where to find them that made the payment becomes a detractor for the speed at which the payment can be made, or drive the cost up to make the payment unaffordable. Then you're at the limit. Then you're into the territory where you need to sacrifice transparency for speed or for cost. But I think that's the debate that is ongoing. That there is a tension there, but that tension is healthy. It needs to be ongoing so that we can explore where is the perfect balance that we should continuously strive for, and that balance will always move. There's always better ways of doing things that will move the balance.
And the reason I was so eager to jump in is because I think it feeds beautifully into the question from the lady from Standard Chartered who was saying the broad push towards modernization. And the way you framed it, Peter, is so interesting for me as well, is to say modernization isn't just about more efficient and faster. Modernization is also about safer, more transparent, more traceable. So maybe you can comment on the question that was raised, which was, how are you aligning yourselves to the modernization push, and how do you do that with cost and keeping costs low as one of the imperatives that we need to have realized?
So one of the things that has happened in not the very recent past, but a few years ago, is a large chunk of regulation around AML-CFT in South Africa was withdrawn because the regulation was too specific about how institutions should do the management of risk and of being exploited by their customers for criminal intent. And that got in the way of modernizing the way that institutions could manage that risk. That ethos is still very much part and parcel of the way that we look at what lies ahead in the future for regulating AML-CFT in South Africa. We have been in and out of discussions over the years about the modernization with the payment system, and we are very eagerly looking forward to how that plays out.
Sure.
Because we really see in the modernization process the opportunities for achieving also better management of risk. Not just, as I say, the cost or the speed aspect of it. Because we want to enforce a regulatory regime where institutions have to manage the full spectrum of risk, not just high risk, but also low risk. It puts the obligation on institutions to work out what's the best,
Sure.
Cost-wise, speed-wise, and achieving the transparency outcome. What's the best tools that they have in their toolbox? And I think it's important that we also want to get to a point, we're not there yet, where if institutions doesn't manage low risk appropriately, that's equally not complying with what the regulatory framework expected. So in other words, if they apply more stringent measures than is necessary to manage low risk, they're also not complying with the risk-based approach, just as much as on the high-end risks. But we're not at that point yet, I think.
And again, you've raised, the invitation to think about the tools that we're using. So I'm going to come back to talk about SupTech and SupTech tools in particular. I'd love to hear your comment on that. But I want to go to Josephat next because, Josephat, the question from Rachel around the Pan-African payments and settlement system, to say Zimbabwe is a part of that arrangement. What has been the benefit? What has that meant to you? Before we then jump to Charles to put the second part of her question, which was, why is South Africa not aggressively pursuing participation, from Rachel? First to you, Josephat.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have been part of it. I think it's coming from the trade flows.
Sure.
We analyzed the trade flows, and we noticed that, yes, we have a lot of trade flows with South Africa in the Southern African region, but also we have trade flows outside that region, in the COMESA and up there. So our appetite was then to harness a system which would allow these trade flows to come to us. But talking about, so the benefits have been, obviously, we are able to harness those trade flows and in an electronic way, rather than people taking money on buses to Tanzania or any other country outside that region. Then the number two benefit has been, we also compare systems at the end of the day. It can become a contingent one day when everything else has failed. So it's a third layer contingent. And number three, just to say, adoption of systems is like adoption of technology. We are all different. You would be shocked that here in this crowd, there might be somebody who still have a feature phone, maybe as a second phone, not maybe as a first. We have not all adopted technology at the same time. And we have not all adopted systems. I think you look at the benefits. I'm not trying to answer for Charles, but
I've just seen protection
yes,
happening
but
here
what I'm
on
saying
stage.
is, what I'm saying is, there are laggards, there are early adopters and late adopters.
I've got you.
And I suppose I'm aware that the Southern African region have got a strategy also
Yes.
to come in as a region, and that's something is already being worked on. So maybe they're hurling slowly.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm seeing Charles looking like he wants to call a friend from the audience. Are we going to call a friend? Okay. All right, so let's call a friend. So you got protection on stage. We're calling a friend from the audience. So won't you please introduce yourself for everybody's benefit, and then come to Charles's rescue on this question from Rachel.
No, I thought I would come to Charles's rescue because we are in conversation about leveraging the PEPS platform for interregional flows or continental flows.
Yes.
So I think my context would be that the PEPS system, as presented to us recently in the past years, was settling on a central banking model where transactions flow in local currency, but settlement happens on a netted basis through central banks. The conversation we entered was that this could expose central banks to foreign exchange risks, to transactions to which they are not party. And in agreement with PEPS, they embedded a commercial bank model where that risk will be carried by the commercial banks to the transaction, which is the most appropriate. I'm party to the transaction, I'm supposed to carry the risk for that. And we said that would be an acceptable model from central banks, but it depends on whether it's accepted by commercial banks.
Got you.
Because they carry the risk. Now, where we are, specifically if I just single out South Africa, is that we had an idea that 2 of our banks were considering joining the system on that model. And we're standing ready to engage with them because we're just going to supervise them once they join the system.
Yeah.
Now we ask PEPS, what do you mean that we should join the system? Because the system will be joined by the participants, which are commercial banks, and will oversee them. I'll cut the matter short. They saying we should sign an agreement with them that will supervise our banks when they join. And we are saying our banks, when they want to join, they should approach us and will approve and will tell you. So now, should we join for them to recruit our banks to say your central bank has joined, or should the banks join and ask us for approval? We prefer the latter.
Understood. So it is, so Rachel, I hope that you saw the gentleman on screen so you can take the conversation forward if necessary. But I think it's an interesting one because it goes back to the question we raised earlier to say, if we agree that in most instances technology is not the issue, these are examples of some of the things that we've got to navigate to find each other. The sequencing of things becomes important, and how that plays out. So I've got 2 minutes left. So what I want to do in the 2 minutes is to address the last 2 questions. And one of those questions is to you, Charles. It was the question from Zinhle, where she speaks about the centralization of data, and she says, is this a pathway that we should be exploring? In particular, for you, Charles, how does it fit in the desire to be less reactive and more proactive?
No, thanks very much. So we are starting, within the bank, we are looking at that to centralize data so that all the other departments that has got interest can also tap into the data. So we are looking at that. But I think the question is to say, what's the problem? I think there are issues that we need to pass, we need to deal with the mandates. So our mandates may have some restrictive, on them, clause on them. So we need to say, how do we navigate within those restrictive mandates to have a centralized database? The other issue that is also very important is the the capacity in terms of human capital.
Sure.
You know, we are talking of data scientists that we are now in demand everywhere. So we need to say, as we are now moving to this situation where we are not only talking of centralization within the entity, centralization with other within the region or with other entities, we also need to have the capacity in terms of human capital, and which is an issue that we are working on it. But I think what I'm saying, there are steps that are in place now to deal with the issue of centralization of data. And it also reduces the cost. Because imagine everybody now starting their own database and they're asking the same reporting entities, banks to report.
Yeah.
So if you centralized, you find that everybody's got interest, you could tap in there. So I think that's the way to go.
Charles, thank you very much. Final comment, Pieter. And I think it's actually a good place to end, because we've been talking about different types of technologies, and now we're saying, bringing it back to the supervisory technologies, the soup tech, and in particular, are we being very intentional about building or putting the soup tech tools in the hands of decision makers in the region? Is South Africa playing a role that you are aware of? And is there more that we could do?
So, I cannot speak for every supervisor around, but I think the adoption of soup tech tools is still a very new idea to most supervisors in South Africa. Most supervisors within our region also have an outward-looking stance to ensure that the region around us have the similar capabilities of supervising, managing risk, etc., that we have in South Africa, because our systems are interconnected. There's no point in South Africa building a Chinese wall around our system, because we cannot prevent inflows and outflows into our system from around our region. I think as the adoption of soup tech rolls out and becomes a more natural thing for our supervisors, so the experience with that will also be more shared with our fellow supervisors around the region. But I think we shouldn't make the assumption that nothing is happening around us. And I think this is a discussion that is very much a two-way discussion, because our supervisors around us in our neighboring countries and further into Eastern and Western Africa face the same challenges that we do, and they are looking at the same solutions. And I do think this is a sharing that where all of us would be moving towards a common objective, rather than one sitting to wait for the other and then share the experience.
A coalition of the willing is probably one of the things that we heard yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, our monitor in front of us is flashing time up, but I do want to give a very warm round of applause to my panelists, please. Won't you please help me thank them? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much.